In the late 15th century, Spain was not the center of power in Europe. The continent's strongest states were elsewhere. France possessed the largest armies on land. The Italian city-states dominated finance and Mediterranean commerce. The Ottoman Empire controlled the eastern gateways of global trade. Portugal, a small but ambitious kingdom on the Atlantic coast, had already begun exploring the African coastline and searching for sea routes to Asia. Spain, by comparison, appeared fragmented and exhausted. For centuries, the Iberian Peninsula had been divided among competing kingdoms and religions. Christian and Muslim states fought for control of the region in a long and brutal conflict known as the Reconquista. Cities changed hands repeatedly, alliances shifted, economies were drained by constant warfare. Only toward the end of the 15th century did political unity begin to take shape. In 1469, the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile joined the two most powerful Christian kingdoms in Iberia. Their union did not instantly create a centralized Spain, but it forged a political partnership that would transform the peninsula. For decades, they pursued one overriding objective: completing the Reconquista. In 1492, their armies captured Granada, the final Muslim kingdom in Iberia. After nearly 8 centuries of conflict, Christian rulers controlled the entire peninsula. The victory gave the new Spanish monarchy something rare in European politics: unity of purpose. But unity alone did not guarantee wealth or influence. Spain still lagged behind Portugal in maritime exploration and behind Italy in trade and finance. The kingdom needed opportunity. That same year, 1492, a navigator from Genoa arrived at the Spanish court with a bold proposal. Christopher Columbus believed he could reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean. Many scholars considered the plan unrealistic. The distance to Asia was vastly underestimated. The risks were enormous. But Ferdinand and Isabella were willing to gamble. Spain had just finished a long war. It needed new sources of wealth, new trade routes, and new prestige. So they funded Columbus's expedition. When his ships crossed the Atlantic later that year, Columbus believed he had reached islands near Asia. In reality, he had encountered a continent unknown to Europeans. What began as a miscalculation soon became something far larger. Within decades, Spain would control territories stretching across the Americas and into the Pacific. A kingdom that had only recently unified would become the center of the first empire that truly spanned the globe. But discovery alone did not build an empire. What Spain created next was something unprecedented: a system capable of governing vast territories across oceans. By the early 16th century, the Spanish crown faced a difficult problem. Lands thousands of miles away had come under its authority. Conquistadors claimed territories in the Americas, but these regions needed governance, taxation, and defense. In 1516, the Spanish throne passed to Charles I, who would also become the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. His inheritance included Spain, territories in Italy and the Low Countries, and expanding claims across the Atlantic. Under his rule, Spain became the political center of a global structure. To govern distant lands, the crown created administrative regions called viceroyalties. Each was ruled by a viceroy who served as the king's direct representative. One of the earliest and most important was New Spain, centered in Mexico City. Another was the Viceroyalty of Peru, governed from Lima. These institutions established courts, tax systems, and colonial administrations that mirrored those in Spain itself. This bureaucratic structure allowed the Spanish monarchy to exert authority across continents. But governing territory required resources, and the engine of Spain's empire became silver. In 1545, miners in the Andes discovered immense silver deposits at Potosi in present-day Bolivia. The mountain, known as Cerro Rico, soon became one of the richest mining sites in world history. Tens of thousands of laborers worked there. Silver poured out of the mines in astonishing quantities. The Spanish crown organized elaborate shipping systems to transport this wealth to Europe. Armed convoys known as treasure fleets sailed across the Atlantic each year, carrying bullion from the Americas to Spanish ports. The silver did not remain in Spain alone. It flowed into the wider European economy, financing trade, warfare, and royal debts. But Spain's imperial system extended even further. Across the Pacific Ocean, Spanish merchants connected the Americas to Asia. Beginning in the late 16th century, massive trading ships sailed annually between Mexico and the Philippines. These voyages formed the Manila Galleon trade. American silver crossed the Pacific to Manila, where it was exchanged for Chinese silk, porcelain, and other Asian goods. Those goods then traveled back to Mexico and eventually to Europe. For the first time in human history, goods circulated continuously across the entire planet. Silver mined in South America could end up in Chinese markets. Asian textiles could appear in European ports. This was not simply colonial expansion, it was the birth of a truly global economy. Yet Spain's empire was also built through conquest. In 1519, Hernán Cortés led a small expedition from the Caribbean to the mainland of Mexico. His force numbered only a few hundred soldiers, but through alliances with indigenous groups hostile to Aztec rule and aided by superior weapons and devastating diseases, Cortés captured the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in 1521. A decade later, another conquistador, Francisco Pizarro, led an expedition into the Andes. There he confronted the Inca Empire, one of the most powerful states in the Americas. Pizarro captured the Inca emperor Atahualpa and dismantled the empire's political structure. Within a few years, Spanish forces controlled vast territories across western South America. These conquests dramatically expanded Spain's reach, but they also unleashed forces that would reshape entire civilizations. The arrival of Europeans brought diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza to populations that had never encountered them before. Without immunity, these societies suffered catastrophic mortality. Entire regions experienced population collapses within a few generations. Cities that once held hundreds of thousands of inhabitants were abandoned. Civilizations that had developed over centuries faced sudden and devastating transformation. Spanish colonial rule also introduced new systems of labor. Under the encomienda system, Spanish settlers received the right to demand labor or tribute from indigenous communities. In theory, these arrangements included obligations to protect and convert local populations to Christianity. In practice, the system often resulted in forced labor and exploitation. Mining centers such as Potosí required enormous manpower. Indigenous workers were frequently compelled to labor under harsh and dangerous conditions. At the same time, colonial societies developed complex hierarchies. Spaniards born in Europe occupied the highest social status. Beneath them were people of Spanish descent born in the Americas. Mixed populations, indigenous communities, and enslaved Africans formed additional layers within this structure. Yet Spanish colonial society was not without critics. One of the most prominent was the Dominican friar Bartolomeo de las Casas. After witnessing colonial practices in the Caribbean, he became a vocal defender of indigenous rights. In his writings, he described violence and exploitation in Spanish territories and urged the Crown to reform colonial policies. His work helped spark debates across Europe about morality, empire, and the treatment of subject peoples. Resistance also emerged among colonized populations. In the Andes, during the late 18th century, a leader known as Tupac Amaru II organized a major rebellion against Spanish authority. Claiming descent from the Inca royal line, he rallied thousands of supporters and challenged colonial taxation and governance. Although the uprising was eventually crushed, it revealed deep tensions within Spain's empire.
For centuries, Spain maintained control through administration, military power, and economic networks. But even the largest empires face limits. By the late 16th century, Spain confronted growing challenges. In 1588, the Spanish monarchy attempted to invade England using a massive naval fleet known as the Spanish Armada. The plan was to transport an army across the English Channel and remove Queen Elizabeth from power. But storms, logistical failures, and determined English resistance scattered the fleet. The defeat damaged Spain's reputation as Europe's dominant naval power. At the same time, Spain's economy faced mounting problems. The massive influx of silver from the Americas caused inflation throughout Europe. Prices rose dramatically, reducing purchasing power and destabilizing markets. Rather than creating long-term